Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're diving into what's really the bedrock of healthcare data, ICD-10 coding.
Absolutely. It's fundamental.
And specifically, we want to unravel the role of sequencing instruction notes within this system. Pretty important stuff.
Vitally important. Think of it like this. The medical record tells a story, right?
Yeah, about the patient's health.
Exactly. And ICD-10 gives us the words, the vocabulary. But these sequencing notes...
They're the punctuation, the grammar.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
They make sure the story is told correctly, that it makes sense clinically.
Right, because the order matters a lot.
It adds this critical layer of meaning. You know, today, we're really on a mission to dig into these sequencing rules.
Focusing on use additional codes and code first.
Those are the main ones, yeah. We need to understand why they're there and how they help paint that true clinical picture.
It's not just about ticking boxes.
Not at all. Imagine, like, a researcher studying long-term effects of a virus. If the initial infection and later complications aren't sequenced right...
The data is useless. Or worse, misleading.
Exactly. Their conclusions could be completely off.
Okay. So these notes, they're basically the roadmap for reporting codes in the right order.
That's it.
And getting that sequence right gives us an accurate and, crucially, a complete clinical picture.
Complete is the key word there.
We'll look at the classic etiology manifestation relationship, cause and effect.
Yep, the underlying cause leading to symptoms.
But also other situations where the coding order is specifically laid out.
Right, it's not just about cause and effect sometimes.
Okay, let's dive into those etiology manifestation relationships first. That seems like the core concept.
It really is a cornerstone of ICD-10. So often, you have an initial condition that's the etiology, the root cause, and that triggers other problems, maybe in different body systems. Those are the manifestations.
The symptoms or resulting conditions.
Precisely. And ICD-10 has clear rules here.
Okay.
Code the underlying cause first, then you code the manifestation.
Cause then effect.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It does. And it's vital for tracking diseases. Think about, say, diabetes leading to kidney disease.
If you code the kidney disease first.
It completely misrepresents how the disease progressed in that patient's record. Bad data for researchers, clinicians, everyone.
Got it. And this is where use additional code and code first really come into play, isn't it?
Exactly. They are the signposts.
Can you break down what each one means? Let's start with use additional code.
Sure. So when you're looking at the code for the underlying condition, the etiology, you often see a note saying, use additional code.
Okay.
That's basically the system telling you, hey, there's likely a related manifestation here, and if it's documented, you need to report it too.
As a secondary code.
As a secondary code, yes.
Yeah.
To give that fuller picture.
And code first.
So conversely, if you're looking at a manifestation code, you'll often see a code first note.
And that means...
That's a direct instruction.
Yeah.
Sequence the underlying condition before this manifestation code. It locks in the order.
So it establishes the timeline, clinically speaking, in the codes.
That's a perfect way to put it. Establishes the clinical timeline.
Now, I've seen some manifestation codes that actually say, in diseases classified elsewhere, right in the title. What's the deal with that phrase?
Ah, yes. That phrase is a really, really important flag.
Okay.
Codes with that title are almost always part of this etiology manifestation setup.
Meaning they need the underlying cause coded first.
Absolutely. They should basically never be the principal diagnosis, the main reason for the encounter.
They can't stand alone at the front.
Right. They must be sequenced second, after the underlying etiology code. They depend on that first code for their context. It's like saying, this symptom exists because of that other diagnosed condition.
So without that first code, the second one doesn't make full sense on its own as the primary issue.
Precisely. It needs that anchor.
And you mentioned the structure is even reflected in the alphabetic index.
It is, which is really helpful for coders. When you look up a condition that's often an etiology, you'll see its code, and then right after it, often in brackets, you'll see codes for common manifestations.
And the brackets mean?
Sequence second. It's a visual cue built right into the index. Helps guide you to the right sequence from the get-go.
That's pretty neat. A built-in guide. Can we walk through a concrete example? Make it stick.
Definitely. Let's use Parkinson's disease with dementia.
Okay.
So you look up Parkinson's in the index, you find G20.
G20. Got it.
And right after that, probably in brackets, you'll see a code like F02.A0.
Which is?
That's dementia in other diseases classified elsewhere. See that phrase?
Ah, yes. There it is.
So the sequence is clear. G20, the Parkinson's, that's the underlying cause, the etiology, it goes first.
And SOR 2.80, the dementia that's happening because of the Parkinson.
That's the manifestation. It goes second, just like the index implies and the code title suggests.
And coding it the other way around would be wrong. Clinically misleading.
Totally misleading. It would look like dementia was the primary problem, maybe with Parkinson's as a secondary issue, which isn't the case here.
Okay, that Parkinson's example is clear. But what if the manifestation code doesn't have "in diseases classified elsewhere" in the title? Does the same logic apply?
Yes, it generally does. The instructional notes are the key drivers here.
So even without that specific phrase?
You'll still likely find that use additional code note back at the etiology code pointing towards the manifestation. And you'll find a code first note at the manifestation code pointing back to the etiology.
So the notes enforce the sequence regardless of the title wording.
Exactly. The fundamental principle, cause before effect, still holds. The notes just make it explicit.
Okay, can you give an example of that scenario where the title is different but the notes dictate the order?
Sure. Let's think about COVID-19 causing pneumonia, a very common scenario recently.
Right.
Okay, so the code for COVID-19 itself is U07.1. If you look that up in the tabular list, you'll find a note telling you to use additional code to identify manifestations, like pneumonia.
Okay, so it points you forward.
It points you to code the consequence. Now, look at the code for pneumonia, specifically due to the coronavirus. That's J12.82.
J12.82, pneumonia due to COVID.
Right. And at that code, J12.82, there's a clear code first note. It explicitly says to code U07.1, the COVID-19 first.
Ah, okay. So even though J12.82 doesn't say "in diseases classified elsewhere."
Correct. The notes still mandate the sequence. U07.1 first, then J12.82, COVID first, then the resulting pneumonia.
That really clarifies it. The notes are the ultimate authority on sequence in these cases.
You really are. Always follow the notes.
Okay, we've spent a good chunk of time on etiology manifestation, super important. But these notes, code first and use additional code, they pop up elsewhere too, right?
They do. They're not just for those cause and effect pairs between two separate conditions.
So what else do they do?
Well, sometimes a single condition just needs multiple codes to really describe it properly, to paint that full clinical picture we talked about.
Ah, providing more detail on one thing.
Exactly. The secondary code adds essential extra information. Maybe it specifies the infectious agent or the severity or, like you said, laterality or the encounter type, things like that.
And the sequencing rule holds. Use additional code comes before code first.
That underlying logic stays the same, yes.
Yeah.
You sequence the code with the use additional code note first, and the code it points to, often having a code first note pointing back, comes second. It's about presenting the core information, then adding the necessary details.
But, and this sounds important, you only use these notes if the specific conditions mentioned are actually documented.
Absolute critical point, yes. These notes are conditional. They only apply if the condition mentioned in the note, like a specific bacteria or gangrene or whatever, is actually documented in the record for that patient.
So you don't just add the codes automatically because the note is there?
No way. That would be inaccurate coding. If the doctor didn't specify the infectious agent, you don't add a code for one just because the note says use additional code to identify infectious agent.
It has to be clinically supported in the documentation.
Always.
Okay, let's walk through some examples of these kinds of sequencing rules. Maybe a use additional code one first. That's not etiology manifestation.
Sure. Let's take N39.0. That's the code for a urinary tract infection, UTI.
Okay, common code.
Very. If you look at N39.0 in the tabular list, you'll see a use additional code note. It directs you to use a code from category B95 to B97 to identify the infectious agent, if it's known.
Right, like the specific bacteria.
Exactly. So if the doctor writes UTI due to E. coli, you code N39.0 first, that's the UTI. Then following the instruction, you add a second code, B96.2, which specifies E. coli as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere.
N39.0 first, then B96.2 for the E. coli.
Correct sequence. But like we just said, if the notes just say UTI and no organism is identified,
then the use additional code note doesn't apply.
It doesn't apply. You just use N39.0. End of story for that coding aspect.
Perfect sense. It's tied directly to the documentation detail. Now, how about a code first example in this other context?
Okay, let's look at pressure ulcers. That's category L89.
Right.
Within category L89, you'll find a code first note. This one instructs the coder to identify and code any associated gangrene first.
Ah, so if the pressure ulcer has become gangrenous.
Exactly. If the documentation mentions a gangrenous pressure ulcer, the code first note tells you that the code for the gangrene itself must be sequenced before the L89 code for the pressure ulcer.
The gangrene takes precedence in the sequence.
Right, because it's a significant complication. But again, if the patient just has a pressure ulcer, no mention of gangrene at all.
Then the code first note is irrelevant for that case.
Completely irrelevant. You just code the pressure ulcer using the appropriate L89 code.
These examples really drive home how the notes guide us to build that more detailed, accurate picture, even outside of clear cause-effect scenarios between diseases.
It's about capturing complexity accurately.
Now, we mentioned medical common sense earlier. How does getting this sequencing right tie into, well, making the coded data actually make sense from a clinical perspective?
It's a huge connection.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, proper coding, including correct sequencing, should result in a coded record that looks clinically logical.
It should reflect reality.
It should reflect reality.
Huh.
If you code a symptom before its known cause, like coding dementia before Parkinson's in our example,
Yeah.
or if you fail to link related issues through proper sequencing, the data just doesn't represent what actually happened with the patient.
And that has knock-on effects.
Huge knock-on effects. Think about understanding disease patterns, treatment effectiveness, if the sequence is wrong in thousands of records.
Our understanding gets skewed, like coding pneumonia first, then COVID.
Exactly. That fundamentally misrepresents the pandemic's progression and impact in the data.
It's like reading a book backwards, isn't it? The words are there, but the story is scrambled.
That's a good way to think about it. You know, the extreme, kind of absurd example sometimes used is coding, say, open heart surgery as the primary diagnosis for someone who came in for a toe fungus.
Okay, yeah, that's obviously ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, but it illustrates the point. Correct sequencing helps avoid these, well, nonsensical representations in the data. It makes sure diagnoses align logically with services provided.
And this extends to things like lab tests and x-rays, too.
Absolutely. The reason for ordering those ancillary services needs to make sense in the context of the primary diagnoses, which are hopefully sequenced correctly. It all ties together.
So it's not just rule following for bureaucracy's sake. It's about creating a coherent medical narrative using the language of ICD-10.
That's the goal. A clear, logical, medically sound narrative.
And that accuracy matters.
It matters hugely. It impacts public health stats, research, reimbursement, resource allocation, and ultimately patient care quality. Good data leads to better decisions at all levels.
This has been really enlightening, a proper deep dive into the sequencing notes. So just to recap the main takeaway.
It's just how critical understanding and correctly applying use additional code and code first really is.
Right, it's not optional, it's fundamental.
It really is. Proper sequencing lets us capture those vital links between conditions, like etiology manifestation, and it adds necessary detail even for single conditions. It's just foundational for data integrity, for fair reimbursement, and for getting that clear picture of the patient's situation.
So for anyone listening who works with or is learning ICD-10,
remember, it's more than just finding a code.
it's about finding the right codes in the right order, telling that patient's story logically and medically accurately.
Precisely. Getting the sequence right ensures causes and consequences are clearly linked.
And that accuracy ripples outwards, doesn't it? Affecting everything from big picture health statistics down to individual patient care and how healthcare resources get used.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Accurate sequencing is powerful.
Yeah.
It helps us understand and ultimately improve healthcare.